Hey guys, welcome to another TLDR jQuery edition. We're going to be giving you a brief introduction to jQuery, the important parts, all the parts you're going to use on a regular basis, and hopefully get you up and running by the end of this video. That's really what the point of these TLDR videos are. So give you a brief rundown and have you be able to jump into an application, start coding, start building, and sort of just get your feet wet at the end of the day. So what and why, right? So those are important questions you have to ask whenever you're learning stuff is, what is it and why do I care? And why learn it, right? So jQuery is a library that allows you to, where it specializes in is being able to manipulate the DOM and select values in the DOM relatively easily, something that didn't really exist before it. And on top of that functionality, it gives us a additional ways, methods to perform things like animations and update values in our HTML and our text. So it gives us a lot of great tools to do that. So that's what jQuery is at the end of the day. Now, why use jQuery? Well, jQuery is a library that is pretty quick to get up and running with jQuery and understand the bare bones minimum. You can understand jQuery in a weekend and get up and going and start building things out. And it's a very intuitive library, and that's one reason to pick it up. Another reason is it's used by a lot of older sites. A ton of sites use jQuery, and a lot of legacy code uses jQuery, and so you're going to need to be familiar with it, especially if you're going for that sort of market. So it's a good thing to be familiar with. Now, larger modern applications, they probably are going to be using something like Angular, React, maybe Vue, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't use jQuery. But mainly jQuery is for simple, small projects in today's day and age, and for older legacy projects or websites. So that's sort of the why. So what are we going to be covering? Quite a bit. We're going to get you started. Every video, I want to make sure that by the end of it, you can get up and going. So we're going to show you how to get started with jQuery in the first 5 minutes or so. And then we're going to talk about selectors, which is how we select values in the DOM, and really how jQuery came to be. And then we're going to be talking about all these methods. This is going to be how to change, how events work, how to add stuff to the page, how to remove stuff from the page, how to add classes dynamically or remove classes dynamically, how to easily do asynchronous calls, Ajax calls, and some animations and more. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. Quick shout out to our sponsor, Dev Mountain Coding Bootcamp. If you're interested in jQuery, interested in the JavaScript world, that's where Dev Mountain really excels at with their web development bootcamp. They cover jQuery, JavaScript, Angular, React, Node, MongoDB, and more. So check them out at devmountain.com, where you get housing included in your tuition. Let's jump into the video. All right, let's jump right into it. So jQuery requires a little bit of setup to get going, not too much. You'll see here that we have our jQuery import. I just downloaded it locally. You can get this from a CDN. And then below it, we have our app.js file, which is currently empty, but we're going to set something up. Do note that it is nested below the jQuery import. This is important because jQuery needs to load before this. So just keep that in mind as you're doing it. And in the body, we just have some static content with an ID, 2 classes, and then nothing on this element here, which is just some static data. So when getting your jQuery project started, you have 2 ways of getting it started. The old way, which is the document. This essentially is, hey, jQuery is running here. This is what this basically means. Document.ready, then we have a function in here, and then we have some code running and a semicolon at the end. So this is the old way of doing it. There's nothing wrong with doing it this way, but there's a shorter hand way to get it up and going. We can instead take out all of this and just have this function in here. It means the exact same thing. It's just a little less code to get started. Again, this is just where we're going to be doing our jQuery. So jQuery got started as a way to easily select data. Remember, in our index file, we have an ID here. How might we get that in jQuery? Well, we can get it very easily, and we'll just go ahead and call this example 1, and we're going to set this equal to $. You're going to access everything in jQuery with a $. And then in here is where we put our selector. When you're dealing with IDs, you're going to use a hashtag. In our case, it's first. And we can go ahead and console.log out the value here of our example 1, just so that you can see exactly what we're going to get. What we're going to get is a very detailed HTML element. And you'll see here as we iterate through. And you'll also notice that it is an array of values when we're targeting it, because you could, in theory, have had multiple IDs. Although you should never. In practice, you could in theory. And you can see here that we have a lot of stuff going on. The height of the client, first child, inner text, inner HTML, the ID, and it goes on and on and on, and a bunch of other most of this stuff's not relevant, right? We really care about 2 or 3 things in here. But we have the ability to access classes as well. And this is just as simple as before when we're dealing with classes. And we'll go ahead and call this example 2. We'll set this equal to, again, $ to access items. And then we were going to put the dot, and I believe I had 2 classes called last. Go ahead and see the value here. Oh, forgot to console log it. And if you're wondering what I'm running to have the page refresh on load, it's a little free extension called Live Server. It's really simple. You install it, and then down here it says go live where this port number is, and you click and get going. So it'll help you get up and going. And what you'll see here is that we now are getting an array of values, that have our items in here, and we can do stuff with them, and we can get those values relatively easy. But it doesn't end there. We can, of course, select the values as well and get those from any tags. So if you remember, we had in H3 here, these were all H3s. And let's say we want to get the H3, we would just pass in the element like so. We can also, of course, chain these if we wanted to. And let's go ahead and give a basic example here, where let's say we wanted an H4 that had a paragraph tag in it, and we could put, Oregon. I don't know. I'm just making words up, guys. Oregon, and we say, look, we want H3 with a P tag. I think we might have to put a space there. Save that. Console.log out example 3. Save it. You'll see here. Oh, maybe I have to do like so. Huh. My mistake. This is supposed to be H4. So H4 with the P tag here. And you'll see that we're able to get these values as well. So you can nest them down and continue going and going and going, but you're still going to get an array of values back. jQuery has a lot of great ways to set values as well as to get values from our elements. So again, what we're storing here in this example is a reference to an HTML element, and what we have are some helper functions to make it a little bit easier to get the value out of here. So let's say we wanted to get the actual text out of this first value. What we could use is the .text method, and you'll see here we're now going to get Dylan, right? That's going to be the text value, and because we're dealing with IDs, when you call .text, it's just going to return the one. What do you think's going to happen when we call text on the class? Oops. So you'll see here that it's actually going to return all the values, which is why we get Israel and Christopher in here concatenated together. Probably not what you want, so we'll have to do some logic down the road. You can do some simple for loop logic to iterate over that. And same thing here with our example 3, where we can get the text out of here, and you'll see that we get all the text values. You'll notice how it omits the paragraph tag nested in there. That's what the text is going to do. Now let's say we wanted the actual HTML. We can get that, which the HTML tag as well. HTML. Now it's going to look the same for these first two, and it should have showcased the HTML here. Maybe I'm mistaken, or it's rendering it. So So my mistake, I got a little confused here. But this HTML is actually going to get the HTML values. It just happens that we're console logging these values that it's going to look the same. However, we just talked about how to get the HTML, how to get the text, and you'll be able to see the difference real quick when we set those values. So as I mentioned, we have these references to these elements in the DOM, in the document object model. And what we're going to do here is, now that we have those references, and we're not going to set any values, we're actually going to update the HTML like so. And we're going to say, look, example1.text, and then we're going to set it, passing in what we want to pass in here. And you'll see here, so text, instead of first name Dylan, we'll put Dolan and save it, and you'll see that Dolan's getting passed in. And then we could do, you know, the same for, let's do example 2, right? Example2.text, and we're going to go ahead and say, what do we want to say? D-money, right? And you'll see how it's going to set it for both values by default. Now, probably not the desired effect. There is a way to iterate through this, and we're going to showcase that a little bit later in the video. But let's go ahead and showcase the difference between the HTML and text. So far it looks pretty much the same. But when we actually set the HTML, what we can now do is we can now pass in HTML as if we would normally. So let's say we wanted to put a line break. What do we want to do? Let's just wrap this with a span, for instance. And inside, what we'll do is we'll just give this a style tag, and we can go ahead and set color to red. And you'll see here that now it's actually applying our styles. And we could throw as much or as little HTML in here as we want for our example, but you guys get the idea. So the HTML will actually inject HTML in here. Now keep in mind that this is going to overwrite what's in there, so make sure that's what you want to do. Now so far we've just been dealing with some headings here, but let's say that we had a input, right? Nothing crazy, just an input type text, little input box. And how would we get the value out of an input? And this could be an input, it could be a text area, it could be a drop down. It doesn't really matter. We'll still be able to get the value out of all of them, and in the same manner. So we'll just give this an ID, or better yet, we won't touch it. We'll just leave it as input, and we'll use a selector tag. So we'll say let input just equal, and we're going to select it, right? And we're going to go ahead and just paste in here, or put in input, and we'll say, how can we get that value? Again, we're just storing a reference to it, but we have a shorthand method to get it, and we can console.log input.val. And you'll see here it prints out an empty string. Let's go ahead and just set that value so that we can see it. We'll set this value equal to example, and bam, you'll see that we get the value directly out of our input. This is going to work for all input types. Radio buttons, it's going to work for selectors, it's going to work for checkboxes, or drop downs rather. So this is how we're going to get the value out of inputs. So hopefully you've been sort of following a pattern here, and you've noticed, okay, well, these values will get it, and what do we have to do to set it? Well, we've already showed you how to do it with getting and setting the values using text and HTML, and you might have jumped to the conclusion here that we could set the value here, and you would be right. So let's just go ahead and throw a test in here, and you'll see that it's going to actually override our test value. And so if you need to set the input, you could do it this way as well. Now let's say you wanted to change the attribute of an HTML element. Now an attribute would be anything like type or value. Now we showcase how to change values, so that one's a little bit unique. But let's say we want to change this type to a number input. How might we, first off, how might we get the value? Well, we would do it by just getting our input, and then we could say ATTR, and then we're in this string here, we're going to pass in the attribute we want to target, which is type. And you'll see right now, it's going to go ahead and get text. However, if we want to change that type to be a number, all we would do is pass in a comma and then the value associated with it. So the sort of get it is just one, set it for this attribute is the other. And you'll notice that it's actually going to change this, so it is now a number input, and of course it would reflect in the HTML as well. So far we've shown how to get data, set data, and so we're going to start fresh. We're going to delete everything that's in here. And same thing in our body here. And now we're going to showcase how to add data. And we're just going to create a little container div here. And we'll go ahead and indent that so it looks a little bit nicer. Cool. Just so that we have, let's actually just give it an ID equals to container. And so what we're going to say here is, how can we prepend data to it? How can we append data? How can we add stuff and not modify stuff? Or well, we can use the prepend and append to add data. How might we do that? Well, let's give an example, right? So we'll just call this container. We're going to set this equal to, remember we're going to use our query selector because it's an ID, so we hashtag container. Now we have access to it, and we can target it and say container.prepend, and this can take in a string, so we could put like hello world if we wanted to, and you'll see that's going to be added. We could put in HTML as well, so this is essentially a stringified HTML, and we can do it that way. So that's going to prepend it. And so you may be saying, what does that really mean? Well, let's throw in another example here, and we're going to put first value. And so we have first value. You see how hello world pops up above first value? What prepend's going to do is it's going to add it before the contents of the container. Now if we wanted to append, meaning we wanted to add it to it at the bottom, right, it's going to add it to the bottom there. So they essentially do the same thing, except one adds it to the top, one adds it to the bottom. Now, I want to make clear that this is adding values nested within this container for append and prepend. And if we actually go and look, you'll see that it's nested within. But let's say we want to actually add an element based off of the container, but on the outside, before the container or after the container, not within the container. We would use the after or before functions, and we could do it like so. And you know what, let's go ahead and give this div a little bit of a color, right? So we'll just give this some inline styling just so that we can see the effect, and we'll just say background dash color, and we'll set it to red, and now we'll be able, as long as we spell it right. All right, cool, so we can see that div. You can also see how it expands when we add that value. So what if we wanted to add a value based off that container before? We would put before, and this again will take in strings, HTML strings, whatever we want to do, and we can just put a a paragraph tag if we want. We don't have to put anything, and we'll put hello galaxy. I don't know, is that a thing? Hello galaxy. Oops. And you'll see that it's going to actually be added but not nested within the div, right? It's going to be before, and then of course we could do it after as well. And you'll see that it's actually added outside of the div. So that's how we're going to add new elements to the DOM using append, prepend, and before and after. All right, so we just showed how to add elements to the DOM, but how do we remove elements? Well, let's go ahead and just have that one first value in there and get rid of these append and adding. So how are we going to remove this first value? Well, pretty straightforward. We can actually say container dot remove, save it, and then it's going to remove that element just like we did before. It's not going to hide it, as you can see in the DOM here. So that's going to remove the element. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that it's going to remove everything within the element. That's why it removes the h1 value as well. So that's what remove does. Now let's say we wanted to remove just the elements within the container, within our div. First, we're going to have to give this a little bit of width. We're going to give this a width of, we'll say, I don't know, 200 px, and a height of 200 px. So at the very least, we should have a red square. Very nice. All right, so instead of removing the div itself, we just want to empty it out. And we can do that like so. And this is going to remove all the HTML elements nested within here, but the div itself will still exist, as we can see. So manipulating CSS is something that jQuery does very well and is a great asset. So let's go ahead and delete this and go define some CSS classes. We'll go in the head here, and we will add a style tag, and we'll just write some CSS classes like this. Again, if this was a production application, we'd never do most of this stuff, but since it is just a learning application, we will define a class. We'll call this add class, and we'll just go ahead and set the background dash color equal to blue, and we're going to just set this to important because I think the inline style will override it, so that should fix that. So how do we add a class to this container, right? We have this value in here. How do we take care of that? We can get rid of this height and width now. Well, we can go ahead and target the container, add class. In our case, all we're going to do is pass in the class name. We don't have to put a dot here because it's not a selector. It doesn't have to be named add class, obviously. It's just what I came up with. And you'll see now we can change the background color, and we're dynamically adding a class to our application. Now we can also remove a class, as you might imagine, where we're going to remove class. And which class are we going to remove? We're going to remove add class like so. And you'll see that it adds it. And let's see, I might throw a debugger right here so we can really track it. So you see right here in the code, see how it's blue right now? Because it's going to be hard to see otherwise, right? So it ran add class, it changed it to blue. In the very next iteration of the code, if the debugger wasn't there, it would then remove the class. Bam, bam, it's red. So it's doing both, adding and removing of the class. We can also toggle classes, which is quite exciting, and we'll show that right now. So let's go ahead and create a button in our body here. And we're just going to have this be toggle. Very nice. And what we're going to do is we're going to listen for every time that we click this button. We're getting kind of in events, and I was going to dive into that in a little bit. But so what we can do to toggle an event is we can say, we have our selector, right? It's a container. So we can just say container.click, and this is going to take in a callback function. And then in here, we're going to, well, first, let's just make sure that it works, right? So we'll say, container dot add class. I'm going to pass in add class. I believe that should work. Save it, and then when we click, oh, excuse me, this isn't container. This is going to be our button. So we only have one button element, so that's fine. So when we click this, it should add the blue background. Very nice. So that's how we can do events. There's click, there's double click, there's scroll, key up, focus. So I might showcase a couple more, but you'll see here you have the ability to essentially listen. This is essentially a listener for when a button is clicked. When this selector has this event performed on it, and then we're going to add this class. Now let's say that we wanted to toggle the class. It's as easy as just go ahead and put in toggle class. And how it's going to work, other than the event that we just discussed and how events work in jQuery, but it's going to essentially say, hey, does it have add class? If it does, go ahead and remove it. If it doesn't, add it. So you'll see here, we're going to be able to toggle that value on and off using toggle class. It's really easy. It's It's one of my more favorite things about jQuery. Now we can also set custom properties in CSS and jQuery as well as get the value. So let's we just ignore this toggle function, but let's take our container here, and what we want it to do is, instead of adding a class here, let's actually just say container.css, and then we can ask for a property value here. And so let's say background dash color, save it, and now when we toggle this, that should have done something. Why didn't it do anything? Oh, it didn't print it out. We have the value here, we just didn't do anything with it. So my bad there, guys. So let's just go ahead and console.log this value so that we can see that it actually is working, right? Don't take my word for it. And save it. And now when we toggle it, you'll see that we get, RGB 25500. And if we've learned anything from jQuery, how we might set this, let's go ahead and set this to white maybe. And bam, now we've set that value to white, and it's just going to return the entire container here because we're console logging it. But we can set the value of custom CSS properties like so. And again, you would just select it, you can get it, and then you can set it. So jQuery is very consistent in how the get and sets work, which is nice. So get JSON allows us to do asynchronous JSON calls. A lot of the calls you'll be doing asynchronously are gets, and jQuery has a awesome way of just setting up very quickly, very easy to go and get that data. So how might we do that? Well, let's go ahead and delete what's in here, and we'll define our get JSON call on this button click. And what we're trying to get back, or what we're going to get back rather, is this Pokemon API call. It's just going to give us some information about Bulbasaur, its moves, its levels, all that sort of stuff. The info isn't really all that important. So get JSON takes in two things. First, it takes in the route, which we'll define right here. And then it takes in a callback function. This is going to be with the data. And let me go ahead and wrap that. There we go. And now it should just work. That's how great it is. So let's just console.log that data, make sure we get it. And this is kind of a slow API, so it might take a second. All right, so on click, get JSON is not defined. Did I forget something? Oh, excuse me. There is a dot between the dollar and get JSON. One more time. There we go. And then we're able to do an asynchronous call with get JSON. Now notice how we didn't pass any headers, we didn't pass any authentication tokens, anything like that. We're going to show you another way of doing it using the Ajax call, just so that you can kind of figure out how to get it up and get it going. This is a shorthand Ajax call, but if we wanted to do the same call in Ajax, we could as well. Alright, so we showed you how to use get JSON, but I want to show you how to use Ajax to do the same call, same exact call, but in our case, we're going to use the Ajax method. The reason for it is later on, as you're working with this, you may want to do a delete method, a post method, a put method to the back end, and you should know how, and that's with the Ajax method. So let's go ahead and comment this get JSON out. Oops. No, I meant to comment. There we go. And what we're going to do is we're going to do $Ajax, and then in here we're going to pass in a object. Now in our object, what we're going to pass in is a couple of things. We're going to start with a type. In our case, it's going to be a get. That's going to know what type of call we're going to do. We're going to have our URL, which will be equal to this bad boy right here. And what else do we need? We're going to have a data type, and that's going to be equal to JSON. And you can see here we need to wrap this in quotes. And JSON is all lowercase. And then we're going to have a success function. So this is going to be where when things work, and notice how we're calling success function last, we have this success that takes in a function, and this is going to have some data, and there's other properties as well. We're just worried about data at this point. Data is the only required one. And let's just go ahead and console.log data. Alright, and so now when we click this button, you'll see that we are getting the same thing, except now using the Ajax method. Now it is worth mentioning that there is a error function as well that you can pass on here, like so. And this would be error, and we're not going to have an error in here, but you essentially pass in the function, get the error message, and display it. So that's one way how you do it. There's a lot of other properties that go along with Ajax, you know, whether it's asynchronous, if it's JSON-P, all this sort of stuff. So you might have to do some research as you're diving into the more complicated puts and posts. All right, let's go over some events in jQuery, and we're going to go ahead and just delete what's in here, and we're going to show hide and show. So we'll still use this button. We'll have our container here, and what we'll do is we'll go ahead and say container.hide, like so, and then bam, gone. And of course, if we wanted to show it right after, we use container.show to do it as well. So you see it leaves and it immediately shows. We just can't see it. Now hide and show both take in a numeric value, and so if we wanted to throw a 1 second transition onto hide, all we would have to do is throw in the number 1000, and you'll see here, like so. And then we could do the same for show as well, although I'm not sure how this would work one after another like this, if they'd be doing the same thing at the same time. So I'm fairly certain that it's not asynchronous. Oh no, it works just fine. Excellent. So you can see it goes in, goes out. So that's hide and show and the delay property. Now say we just wanted to toggle these values. We could do that with the toggle value here, and it's gonna toggle the hide and show property. So you'll see here, bam, 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 bam. And this also takes in either a millisecond, or you can actually use two reserved keywords which are slow, and you'll see it like so. And there's also fast, which are just predefined values in jQuery for this. And so you'll see that's much faster. I like slow better. And there's also a couple other things that we can do here, where we can pass in a easing value, and they have swing and linear. The default value apparently is swing, so let's do linear and see what happens here. Hey buddy, just filming a video. Alright, a couple other animations worth noting are the fade in, fade out. So we can go ahead and fade out this value like so. And as you might imagine, it's going to take in similar values. So you see that's a fade out. And then I believe it can take in a designated time period. So you see there. And then we can also do container dot fade in. I'll do 1000 as well. Very nice. And this, of course, we can do fade toggle. So that works just as well. And we have other animations as well, such as slide up, slide down. So right now we are exposed. So let's go ahead. Is that capital S? Lowercase, so slide up. So very nice. And then we can throw in, let's do it. I feel like we'll give that a nice long one, so we can really see it. And we'll say container dot slide down 2000. And at this point, you've probably guessed that there is a slide toggle as well. So you would be right. And this would handle the sliding toggle of our elements here, which is nice. So you have a lot of built-in effects, and you're able to chain the animations together if you wanted to. And yeah, let's go ahead and talk about events now. So we showcased a way to create a click function earlier, and what we're basically doing is we have a selector, and then we're calling click, and we're passing a callback function in. That's one way of doing events, and there's other ways. I believe there's double DBL click as well. So when we save that, it's just DBL click, and then you'll see here one toggle doesn't do it, but if we double click, there we go, we'll get our value. And there's a ton of them, right? So you could look right here. There's click, double click, mouse enter, and these are just some of them. If you go into jQuery documentations, there's even more, right? So that's one way of setting up events. You can also use the on function, which is kind of nice, and it kind of gives you a more standard approach to creating events. So let's say we wanted to create a click, because that double click's a pain in the ass, and we want to say, look, on, so select our button element, and use the dot on, and then it's going to take in one property, which is going to be the event name, in this case click, and then we're just going to go ahead and pass in our function like we would before. And this is my preferred way of doing it, but everyone has their own opinion on what works and for them, and so I encourage you to do it. I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way in reality, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't work in jQuery anymore. Maybe the people in jQuery are very passionate about these things. So that's how you would handle events, and it's pretty easy. Essentially what you're doing is you're setting up a listener saying, hey, on this element, listen for when a click happens, and if it happens, run the code that's inside here. So it's pretty intuitive in my opinion. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the jQuery video. As always, these videos should get you up and running to get started, really. That's the goal of my TLDR series, to cover the stuff that you're going to need to know to start building applications, to start working with the technology. But I encourage you to not take it as the Bible of the end-all be-all, if you will, because it's just supposed to be an introduction video. So continue to grow and learn with all of these series. But I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please comment, like, subscribe, share. That always really helps. Shares help grow the channel better than anything else. And, of course, check out my other courses on Udemy. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Daddy's got to film a video, Dito. Daddy's working. You gotta go lay down. Daddy's gotta get his work done, kitty. Hey guys, I just want to thank our sponsor, DevicePlus.com. They have a great Internet of Things blog where they're talking about Arduino and Raspberry Pi stuff. And if you click the Device Plus icon there, you can check out this awesome article about how to make a laser tripwire using Arduino.